A Light in the Darkness Chapter 32, Fan Fiction by Azazyel. Of course, building a worthy sect building wasn't as simple as poking a couple buttons on an array and watching the array suck up materials and spit out a finished building. The arrays I had on hand only had so much telekinetic reach, which left the engraving of the arrays and runes that needed to be done inside the actual buildings themselves needing to be done by me. By hand. Ellesmere, if I have to re-engrave this array with 700 individual markings for a third time, I am literally going to hold you by your ankles and use you as a stick to beat off these demonic birds. I growled as Ellesmere sat under the little warded pagoda I had already set up for us to relax in when we didn't want to go all the way to the ship when I decided to take a break. But we had realized really quickly why the mountain top, other than being super high in elevation, was rather devoid of life, other than the hardy thin vegetation that dotted the mountain top. The mountain was fucking infested with pre-sized flying dodo-shaped birds, and were just as annoying and worse stupid as the damned birds they seemed to be modeled after. Literally, you would think that after I bound one up in my Kasaya beads and smashed it so hard into the mountain as I yanked it out of the air that it practically exploded on impact, it would dissuade the randomly flying birds coming to try to eat us. But nope, even as a small hill of their kind's corpses began to stack up while I was desperately trying to work on a more delicate array system, they just brainlessly, one by one, continued attempting to eat me. Meanwhile, Ellesmere thought it was just fucking hilarious. As the shriek and dive bomb of the creatures would make me fuck up the array I had been working on, and send me into a storm of curses. Honestly, it was like spending an hour building up some IKEA furniture, slowly putting all the parts together, and once you went to put on the screws to lock it all into place, your kids run into the room and ram into you and the project, sending the whole thing collapsing into a pile of useless boards. And worst of all is how your wife is just laughing at you from across the room while sipping some fucking wine. Yes, dear, Ellesmere said sarcastically as she strutted out of the protection of the pagoda I created and took over dealing with the pests as I continued making the array scheme that would act as the pillar for all the arrays that would later attach to it around the sect to be. What I had been working on was basically the operating system that would host all the other third-party programs you would download in a computer, being the analog for the main array I was making, and the other arrays being the programs. So, with it being so open to proper adjustments to add new reality-bending arrays. To say the least, the complexity was second only to making my ship, but I had weeks to work on my ship in the quiet and safe interior of our warehouse, whereas here I was exposed to the howling winds and the jumbo fucking suicidal dodo birds of doom. But finally, after much work, I managed to get the actual building done with the arrays needed to protect it from the elements and kill any animals that decided to land upon it. Alright, let me just stow the ship inside the building, then we can get this building set up, I said as shrunk down the ship with the same array system I used previously back in the warehouse and carefully used the anti-gravity array I had the ship and the shrinking array placed upon to float into the sect's main hull. I had to be so careful as even if the ship was shrunk. Well, that didn't mean it lost any of its mass or weight. But a simple anti-gravity rune on another array plate made it able to be carried away without much issue, other than the anti-gravity rune being literally slow as a turtle walking at a steady pace. Well, now that we have a house, and we can try to get some disciples once I make the library and the weather array over the next couple days, I muttered tiredly as I all but collapsed into the lovely bed Ellesmere set up for us to sleep together in. Jake, you can take your time. You will literally live for a few hundred years at this point by your own estimation. So, there is no need to rush things when you can safely do these things one step at a time. Ellesmere softly counseled me as she laid next to me and had buried my face into her soft breasts while brushing her fingers through my blonde hair. As much as I would love to agree with her, that wasn't really an option. This universe spat in the eye of stagnancy and relaxation. Should I have decided to skip making weapons or the force field for my ship, dealing with those orcs would have been a lot more trouble. So, I saw no way in hell for me to just kick back and relax until I hit the divine ranks in cultivation, as only then would I feel safe here in the material world, and could relax. What kind of qualifications will the disciples even need to get into the sect, my love? Ellesmere questioned softly after a bit more of pampering before she grudgingly allowed my face to escape her warm breasts so I could speak to her clearly, as I had on more than one occasion attempted to hold a conversation in the middle of her wonder tits and failed. First step is for them to make it up the mountain path I will create to the sect. Such a thing will test their physical abilities and drive. Also, I will make the gravity around the steps I create higher based on the weight you are carrying, so people cannot be literally carried up there. I refuse to allow some rich brat or young master in my sect to be carried through trials. I said fiercely, with Ellesmere nodding in understanding. To come into this, with a determination to forbid nepotism, is a great plan. But what will you do when the elders of this sect you will create years down the line have children? Will you treat them the same as new aspirants? She questioned with a smile. I couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of a child born of a cultivator and, more especially, an elder of the sect, who would obviously have the resources to make sure their children had the best training and resources possible, to get into the sect officially, failing. Ellesmere, if we have all the strength and resources, we already have now times a good 10 or so. Would you be worried about our child being unable to climb up a series of stairs? I asked somewhat sarcastically, and she firmly shook her head in denial as she knew damned well with her Eldar genes and my own cultivation-enhanced human genes any child we had, even at this point, would be greater than some of the better Astartes once they became a teenager, let alone how much easier it would be for them to cultivate. Funny thing about offspring of cultivators was the child would basically at heart have the potential of the parent's realm at the time of conception, so should I have a child right now with Ellesmere, then the child would be guaranteed to, with hardly any problem at all, reach the true realm with no bottlenecks. I expect simple mortals with little to no special abilities to climb up the path of ascension I will create for them to join our ranks. If children of the cultivators, we groom within the sect, cannot pass such a trial, then they should be banished or demoted to a servant lest they simply be a drain on resources. I explained gently as I moved over so Ellesmere could instead snuggle up to me with her, laying her head atop my chest as I began playing with her long golden hair streaming down her back. Cultivation was a much more extreme version of being a predator, in essence. You go around killing and uprooting all life forms, whether it be special herbs or even powerful animals, for the cultivator to refine them into energy to fuel their cultivation. If people didn't have the strength or willpower to live such a life, then they simply didn't belong here.